Welcome, SENS TALK.
Russell winds in, feeds it back across the strike, and scores! Brady Tkachuk makes it 2-0. Claude Giroux, hit along, scores!
Ronnie! Tim Stutzlock cross, Tkachuk score! The captain, Brady Tkachuk, buries it with 1:18 to go.
See you later. Go, SENS, go. All right, I'm joined with the voice of the Ottawa Senators for every year of SENS hockey. It is Dean Brown. Dean, welcome back to SENS Talk, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. You know, I always say this when I have you on or when I'm texting you. I've been a fan of yours since I started watching hockey. And when I started this channel 12 years ago, I can never have imagined 12 years later I'd be having you on the show. So it's always a pleasure. How's your summer been so far?
It's been pretty good. Lots to do. Did some traveling. Sue and I went out to Newfoundland, visited with some of her relatives out there. We've had relatives in town, both my sisters from out west. One came last week, one's here right now. So other than that, the normal stuff, mowing the lawn and, just the normal summer, waiting and anxiously waiting for hockey to start again.
Exactly. And, we got a lot of hockey to talk about, I'll tell you that. And great to hear you went to Newfoundland. You had some family come in as well. You saw some family out there. I just recently went to Alberta as well, saw some of my girlfriend's family. So that's
Beautiful,
what summers are about. It's unbelievable. I'll show you some pictures after. I went to, the Rockies. I went to Banff and Canmore, and then I hiked up Rawson Lake with my girlfriend. It's, I've never been to the Rockies, right? So when you see it in person, it's something to see. Once again, I said this in my video the other day, I recommend everyone to go see the Rockies, go hike if you can. It's unbelievable. And you're right. That's what summers are for,
Yep.
So, great to hear that, your summer's been going well, I should say. But we're wrapping up the summer. We're approaching September. The rookie tournament is about to start in a couple of weeks, camp in a few, and the regular season in 6. So, before we get into the player acquisitions and subtractions and the potential playoffs and all that fun, juicy stuff, let's start off with the bench. What are your thoughts on the new coaching staff here in Ottawa?
I like it on paper. You have to see how it functions in real life. No one knows the answer to that because it's a new group, with the head coach, Travis Green. He's openly admitted that, a couple of the guys on the staff, he really didn't know. He didn't know Ben Sexton before he met him, but through the interview process came to really appreciate how good a young coach he is. So I always like a coaching staff when it's a smattering of different perspectives. I think it's very important that Alfie's still on the staff, that he wanted to come back. I think that is a very, very big thing because he's got a huge hockey brain, but also, he just commands so much respect from the players as a Hall of Famer. And he's one of those guys that can oftentimes be an out of the box thinker, and that's good for a coaching staff. But one of the other things that I really like is the fact that Mike Yeo is on this staff. So you have, a head coach, and one of the assistants has been a head coach. And I always think that is a really good situation to have. And lots of young head coaches don't like there to be another experienced head coach on the staff because, that feeling like, I may have just hired my own replacement. You got to have confidence in yourself to hire somebody who's already been a head coach. And so I like that combination. But no, I like the staff. I think it's got the potential to be the right staff for this group, because lots of times you can have a great coach and it just doesn't mesh with what you have as a team. So, we'll all see. We don't know. It's a whole new thing, and you have to see it actually in motion and see organically how the relationship with the players, how it evolves. But on paper and, from what everybody's saying, it looks like a good, positive thing right now.
Absolutely. This is certainly one of, if not the most experienced, coaching staff the Sens have had, at least in this century. It's been a lot of new coaches as the head coach and a lot of inexperienced assistants. So it's great to see, like you mentioned, two basically vets on that bench, and you sprinkle it in with some youth with Sexton, and of course a Hall of Famer in Alfie, and of course Bumgarner as well. So there is a lot of experience on that bench, and that's great to see. And it should translate to wins. It should translate to a much more, structured hockey. But like you said, we'll have to see. One thing I wanted to note, though, about, Travis Green is the fact that, and he spoke to some season ticket holders the other day, he said that the biggest part of his coaching style is building that trust with the players. And I think that's a great sign. You want to push the players to play hard and be as best as they can be, but you also want to have their trust. So, it's not just being hard on them and being an a-hole, to be honest. It's you're coming from a good place, trying to just make them better and make the team better. So building that trust is so huge. So to see that that's a big part of his coaching style is a great sign. Because again, you never know how players are going to mesh, but the fact that the coach sees trust and respect as a huge component of his coaching style, to me anyways, is a great sign. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of new faces, and we have to wait and see how the roster really looks. We'll see, of course, in preseason how they kind of look, but the regular season's where we're really going to get an idea. But just to give an idea of how many additions and subtractions we've gone through this offseason, let's start with the subtractions. Jonas Korpisalo, Jacob Chikrin, Eric Brandstrom, Matthew Joseph, Mark Kaslik, Boris Kachuk, Parker Kelly, and Dominic Kubalik are all gone, while the Sens have brought in Linus Ullmark, Nick Jensen, David Perron, Michael Amadio, Noah Gregor, and just the other day, Nick Cousins. And there's some AHL guys they brought in as well, like Adam Gaudette on a pretty big deal. It's a top 20 salary deal in the AHL. And you got some other smaller prospects like Burgo and Chason you got for Yarventi, for example. But you also lost some AHL depth in Yuri Smejkal and Chartier, Amama, Yarventi, Sokolov, Larson, Thompson, Mandalizi. So, the AHL team might struggle a little bit. We'll see what happens with that. But with the NHL team, what do you really think about those additions primarily? I mean, Linus Ullmark's a great addition. David Perron, there's some really good experience on this team and elite play that's been brought to this team. So what do you think?
I think overall, it's probably going to be a team that's a little harder to play against, especially amongst the forwards. Nick Cousins is a veteran guy. He's 31 years old. He's been in the league a while. And one of the things that, people hate playing against him. Some people call him one of the dirtiest players in the league. I suppose you don't like that.
29%, by the way, in an athletic poll, 29% of NHL players said the most disliked player in the league for them is Nick Cousins.
So almost a third of the players in the league, so he plays a certain style that a lot of people think is a dirty style, but he's going to get your attention. And David Perron is a veteran guy who also is a guy that is hard to play against. And Amadio is less that way, but he's a bigger body and going to lean on you. But I think when I look at this roster, and I think Ridley Gregg this year is going to be a regular player, and he can be annoying to play against. And so when you have him and Cousins and Perron, and you're always going to have Brady Tkachuk, that's a different kind of punch in the head, kind of annoying. But even still, I think it's going to be a harder team to play against. And I think on the back end, it appears that Clevin really has a spot to lose on the left side as the third pairing defenseman. He wants to be a big body physical defenseman, so that kind of changes the dynamic back there if that comes to pass. So I think they're going to be a little bit of a different kind of team. But and all those changes I think are important, and we're going to have to see how they come about. But I think that the conversation almost always begins and ends, and maybe fairly or unfairly, with the goaltending. Yes. This team last year was tied for last in the league with Philadelphia in team save percentage, and had they just been at the median point in the league, the median point in the league was just below 900 for a save percentage. Had Ottawa been there, they would have been a playoff team. Didn't even have to be a top 10 team, just middle of the league, they would have been a playoff team. So, they certainly have to be better as a team defensively, but the goaltending, you can't get around it. The goaltending has to be better. So I think with Linus Ullmark, a guy who the NHL.com poll last week had him as one of the top 10 goalies in the league and won the Vezina just 2 years ago. So, you have to think, and I'm sure the organization is hoping and praying that he can help solidify that position. And that changes everything, because I'm of the mind that if you can't fix that, the other changes don't matter. They're important, but they don't matter if you can't get your team into at least the middle of the pack in save percentage. You don't have a chance to challenge for a playoff spot. So I think that of all the changes, and we knew change was coming, and that's great. But I think you can't get around the fact that the biggest one is Linus Ullmark. In my mind, there's just no way about that not being the biggest, most dramatic change to the franchise. And I still think that was some unbelievable work by Steve Staios, not just to get Ullmark, but it was one of those things where I thought they were going to have a real hard time getting out from underneath Korpisalo's contract.
Yep.
That $5 million contract, I thought after the season he had, how many teams are going to be willing to take on that contract? So I was asked by somebody else, is it a successful trade if he doesn't sign an extension? And I said, yes. You'd love for him to sign an extension and play well, but to my mind, it's already a successful trade in that you have improved your goaltending for at least 1 year, and you've gotten out from under Korpisalo's contract, which frees you up to do something else if he doesn't re-sign, but you've gotten out from under that, which gives you so many more parameters. And best case scenario is he plays like he did in Boston and he re-signs here. That's best case scenario. But to my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, but to my mind, even if that doesn't happen, just getting out from underneath that contract and solidifying your goaltending, that's a win.
Not agree more. And, in a down year, I say, for Linus Ullmark, he was top 10 in goals against average at 2.57. He was top, 7 for save percentage at 0.915. He was top 10 for many of the important stats, even the advanced analytics. This is a guy, when he started out his career in Buffalo, that was not exactly an all-star defensive team, and he put up 920 save percentages when he was a rookie. Now he's very, very much more experienced, of course, a Vezina winner. This is a guy that, frankly, could become, especially if he extends with the Ottawa Senators long-term, the best goaltender in franchise history. At least one of the most talented in goaltending, history for the Ottawa Senators, because his stats and his body of work, and everyone says it's Boston. No, it's not Boston. It's him. Again, with Buffalo, he was incredible. And Boston, they're a strong defensive team, but they have some weak defensive abilities as well. A lot of rebounds were given up, for example, a lot of slot chances. If you look at the advanced analytics, he had a lot of tough shots he had to face, and he made some big stops. So, again, solid defense in front of him, put up great numbers. And even with bad defense in front of him, as a younger player with less experience, put up some solid numbers. So that's a guy, like you just said, if he can put it on and keep up that type of performance, not even 920, just 910. Like you said, just a little bit above league average. They should at least be in the playoff conversation, let alone in the playoff picture entirely.
And I was going to say one other thing about him. Like Ottawa may have a better chance than people might think at extending his contract, but I don't know him. I've been around when other people are speaking to him. I have not met him yet. Since he's become an Ottawa Senator. I remember standing in a scrum in Buffalo when he was there. I've been in scrums, in Boston. I don't do the interviews, so I'm not interviewing him. I'm just standing there while he's talking to other people. So I can't for a second tell people that I know Linus Ullmark. But from what I understand, he's a guy obviously that wants to win, and he wants to play in a good team, and he wants to be the number one guy. But he's also very, very family driven. He's got a wife and a couple of young kids, and one of the great benefits of being in Ottawa is this is a great city if you have a young family. And, he's bought a place down in Westboro, very close to Anton Forsberg, and he knows Forsberg well. They've played together. They've been teammates before. He lives in that area of town too. The families are already, like kids going to school. That's already happening. And so I think that stuff, in addition to, he's got to feel good about where he's playing hockey for sure. But those other things, those other life things, family things, his wife liking it here, and his wife and his family like being in Ottawa because it's such a family friendly city. That can weigh as much as anything on a player's decision. So I think Ottawa's got a pretty good chance at extending this guy because of not just this team and where I think it's headed, and I think it's upwards, but the fact that Ottawa is Ottawa, and that, is going to fit right into where he is in his life and where his family is in its life. And I think that's a big advantage.
I think that's an absolute fantastic point. And I actually wanted to ask you about that because, not only did he move early into Ottawa, I mean, this is before camp. He took the time to come. He's been in Ottawa already, I'm pretty sure, but he's moved in a month before, essentially a month before the regular season kicks off anyways. And that will, like you just said, will give him and his family an opportunity to get to know the city. And of course, they're near Forsberg. And speaking of that, he bought a house. You don't see it every single day, a player on a one-year contract buying a house, especially in this market. So what do you think about that? Do you think that kind of indicates something's going to happen here, or what do you think?
Well, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that, that's the way it's all going to play out. I think, anybody who follows this team or anybody who's a fan of his team, that's something that you'd like to see. I think there's a lot of indicators there, but, on the devil's advocate side, you can, in this market, you can buy a house and sell a house, and very rarely do you lose money on it. And if you don't want to rent and you want to buy and you sell the house in a year, you're probably not going to lose money on it. So there's that side of it. But I think I'm kind of like you. I think it's an indicator that the player may well be thinking more about, there's a higher probability of staying than not. So might as well settle in and buy a house. And if you have to, you can sell it after a year. But if you re-sign, you're already set. So I'd like to think, I'd like to be an optimist and think that that's more what that means. And maybe we'll all be wrong. I don't know. Maybe we will be. But I like to think that's a good sign that his intention right now may be to re-sign, and he wants to get in, get settled, get his kids in school, get ensconced in the community. And, he's well aware that, Alfie, you look at other Swedes, and, he's well aware that Alfie moved here, stayed here, became a Canadian citizen. Like he's talked to other people. He knows what it's like to live here when you have a family. And so I'd like to be one of those optimists that think that that's a good sign.
I do too. And yeah, like you said, of course he can sell. It's just, no one wants to buy a house for a year and flip it, right? So that's my thinking. He could probably afford it and he can do it, but that's a hell of a commitment, right? That's a huge commitment. So to me, I'm like you. I like to be happy. I like to be positive. That's what sports are about. Everyone, I'm not going to lie. A few years ago, definitely I was down in the dumps quite often, like a lot of other Sens fans. I think we had a lot more reasons back then. Nowadays, let's just be positive. Let's be happy and excited that hockey's back. Now, just on the note of the additions and subtractions, we didn't really talk about Nick Jensen and the Jacob Chikrin trade. What do you think about that trade and the addition of Nick Jensen to that top four?
I just think that there was a couple of things that went into that. Some of the monetary, it wasn't a one quadrant decision. You look at this quadrant and that's, do it because of that. I think there was a bunch of things. Number one is that the fit was difficult from the very beginning, because Jacob is a left shot. Somebody was always going to have to play the right wing, and they tried him, or right wing, or right defense. They tried him over there with Sanderson, him over there with Chabot. They tried Chabot over there, and it was okay, but it was never great. And the style of play for him, you had three guys, and none of them are the standard stay-at-home guy. And the other part of it is that Jacob was probably their best offensive defenseman, and certainly was on the power play. But the other thing that stares at you, and don't even have to go into the analytics, just straight plus minus, like it's not a good look when you got a defenseman who's I don't know what he finished, minus 30, minus 31.
One of the worst in the league, yeah.
Yeah. So, like if a team's going to get better, every defenseman, even your higher skill guys, have to be able to defend a little. So, when people say, well, you get Jensen, he's not nearly as skilled a player. Well, that's if you think the term skilled only refers to players that generate points. Being able to be an anchor stay-at-home guy who's capable of playing well with a more skilled, technically offensive player, that's also a skill, and that's Nick Jensen's career.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is too that you have to look at your mix going forward. At the end of this season, Jacob Chikrin is going to be an unrestricted free agent, and because he can generate offense, he's going to be a player that's probably going to command, I don't know, $5, $6, $7 million a year. And Ottawa has to look at the bills that are going to come due in the next couple of years with some of their younger players that they do want to keep, and you balance out, what you have and what you're going to have. There's no team that runs on a 1-year game plan. You're always looking 3, 5, 7. Those are the year breakdowns that you're looking at, and extrapolate the guys you're going to have to sign and what you think you might have to pay. And there's just no way that Ottawa or any team in this league really is going to have, 2 $8 million defensemen in Chabot and Sanderson, and then a $6 or $7 million defenseman who's your third pairing left side or an awkward right side. So, there's a bunch of things that didn't mesh, and going forward, you have to be able to figure out what you're going to be able to afford. So I think there was a whole bunch of things that were in play there, and it just led to the decision that it was probably a better idea to get a more traditional partner style defenseman to play with either Chabot or Sanderson. And most likely it's going to be Chabot, and Zub will stay with Sanderson, but that's not written in stone. And just the Chikrin experiment, there was a lot of good things, but there's some things that were nothing but awkward over and over and over again. And affordability down the road was going to be an issue. So make a move now. And I think the mix is probably just going to end up being better. And I think it's probably going to be better for Jacob really good guy and a good player, but I think it's probably going to be better for him to be in a different situation as well.
I agree. And, on that note, sort of just, looking at the Sens position and Chikrin's position, I absolutely agree. I think you can't compare these two players and automatically say, well, Washington won the trade. Did they get the more highly offensively talented defenseman? Absolutely. No one's disagreeing. But two things. One, Nick Jensen's actually a very, very solid skater. He can create offense if he wants. He just doesn't, because his job is to be that anchor guy, like you said. And the second point, very simply, is you just said it. We have two guys in the top four already that are offensive orientated, are left-handed, and are making $8 million. Okay, so you said it. There's only one other team in the National Hockey League with two defensemen plus making $8 million. That's New York Rangers. So, there's a reason for that. Like you said, there's a reason why the Nashville Predators a few years ago, when they had all those defensemen, they had to get rid of them. You can't keep them all. And most importantly, you're not going to lock yourself up to an offensive defenseman when I already said you have two already locked up, and you need a right-handed guy that can help out on the defensive side of things, kind of like an Artem Zub. So, Nick Jensen brings much more flexibility to this lineup and brings a lot to the lineup that Chychrun did not bring. This guy can play on the penalty kill. He can be that anchor for Chabot, who desperately needs it, because Chabot's been the guy, as you know, you've watched every game, he's been the guy playing 30, 35 on average at times over the last 4 or 5 years, and it stunted his growth a little bit. He's still a fantastic player, but any player playing half the game a good amount of the time, or at least a decent amount of the time, it's going to struggle at times and get more injuries and fatigue and whatnot. So I'm really excited for that addition. I think it's pretty under the radar. And again, everyone looks at the sexy stats and the goals and the flashy numbers, but ultimately that's not what only wins you games. You need some of that, but you also need some of the things that Nick Jensen brings to the club. So could not agree more on that. Kind of on this note, though, what is the biggest boom or bust player on the Sens going into this year?
Who knows? For me, there's two guys that I really look at. Like we've already talked about the fact that Tyler Clevin on the back end. It looks like it's his job to lose. So it's interesting to see a big guy. The big guys on defense usually take longer to develop, and his path has actually been quite short. So it'll be interesting to see if he's really ready to be an everyday defenseman, because they kind of need him to be an everyday defenseman.
Yeah.
And then trying to figure out whether JBD is an everyday defenseman. He ended up being that last year because they needed him to be, but there's still some doubt in some people's minds whether he can be, consistent enough every night to be that. So those are still some questions, but I don't really look at those or boom or bust things. Those are a couple of guys who played NHL games, and they have room to grow and they have room to progress. I think for me, when I think about boom or bust, I look at two guys up front, and one of them is Tim Stützle. And I really believe that this is going to be a boom season for Tim Stützle. First of all, what did he get last year? 1 power play goal.
Yeah,
we will never
That's
see that again in his career. That was an anomaly. That is just like, this is the highest skilled, offensively skilled player on this team.
Yes.
And we will never see another time where that happens. But I think away from the stats, and we saw it in the last part of last year, part of the maturation of Tim Stützle, I think he's still only 22.
Oh, he's a young lad, that's for sure.
I don't think he's
Younger
20. I might be wrong. I don't think he's turned 23. Maybe he has. But anyway, still very young. Part of the maturation is that a lot of high skill players go through, and he's no different, is the body language and the face and complaining to officials. That has to stop. That has to, because you don't get any calls. People just start thinking of you as a whiner. And last year, at the end of the year, I think we saw that really diminish. I think Claude Giroux had a big hand in that and saying, Tim, you're a great player. That's why people keep cross-checking you. That's why they slash you. That's why. So you have to, like every great player, Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, they all go through that. People are hacking and whacking because you're a skilled player. You got to learn to live with that, and you can't complain all the time. Just play, and you'll get more calls if you just play. Number one, and number two, more pushback because of that. He's not going to be a guy who's going to be dropping the gloves, but there's far more pushback now from Tim Stützle, and that I think is one of the signals that he's gone through that maturation process, kind of the way David Pasternak had to do in Boston. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of similarities in those kinds of players where they start to realize That it's the NHL. This is the way it is if you're a high skill guy, and you either live with it and find a way to play through it, or you fade away. And Tim Stützle is not a guy that's going to fade away. This is a hyper competitive, very prideful athlete. And so I think one of the boom players this year is going to be Tim Stützle. I really believe he is ready to go to another level. I really do. And the other guy is Josh Norris. Because of the injuries that he's gone through, I think Josh is at a place now where I don't want to use the bus thing, because that's a dangerous place when you've gone through the injury history that he's gone through. And I don't even want to go there, because I know in my job, you're not supposed to get close to players, but this is a guy that if you spend 10 minutes with this guy, you can't help but like him. This is a fantastic individual, and you want good things to happen for him in hockey or out of hockey. So, he's a guy that you cheer for if you know him even a little bit. And I know him just a little bit. And so you want good things to happen for him. If he stays healthy, I think he could blow the box wide open, because he wants it. He's been so beat up with injuries the last 3 years. I think if he gets healthy, stays healthy, and becomes the player that he is, that I think he's going to have an explosive year. So my two boom guys would be Tim Stützle and Josh Norris. And let's be honest, on this team, if your number 1 and number 2 centers become your two boom players, that tells you the team is going in a huge direction forward. If you get goaltending and your number 1 and number 2 centers are boom players, and you've solidified your top 4 defense, that puts you in a situation where it is reasonable to say this is a team that should be able to legitimately challenge for a playoff spot.
Yeah, I agree on both of those picks. I think Stützle was a little bit interesting for me, but once I listened, I do agree. That power play rut that he was on was, I don't even know how to describe it. It just didn't make sense. It's literally statistically impossible that he went so long without scoring. And that, like you said, will definitely not happen again.
We'll never
and
see that
Timmy,
again.
in terms of the whining to the refs and stuff, you said it yourself. He's just a very passionate competitor. Now, in terms of the diving, that part's true. The diving, that narrative, I hate that narrative. He's a guy that, like you said, he gets whacked. He gets tripped up because he's a talented player. He's quick on his feet. It happens. And more often than not, he's tripped up because of how good he is. The other guys just can't keep up, and it's not his fault that people are whacking him and knocking him down. Sure, there's been a few examples where, like, yeah, maybe he went down a little easy, but you can literally say that about, like, at least half of the league on average. So I think that narrative is ridiculous.
One thing about that, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was talking near the end of last year with a skating coach, not Ottawa skating coach, but a guy that I know in the league was a skating coach. And he said one of the parts of the maturation process for guys like him, because he's not the first guy where people in the league say he's diving a lot, and he may or may not be diving, the coach was saying, because I don't watch him that much, but he said a lot of it has to do with their ability to read the game and feel the game and how they use their edges. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, guys like him play on their toes a lot, and you're not terribly stable on your toes because you're trying to make plays. But as players get older, they intrinsically start to understand, in this particular situation, I have to come off my toes and get more of my blade on the ice so I can protect the puck and protect my body. And he said that makes you more stable, which makes it harder to knock you off the puck. But it also, when you get hit, when you're on your toes, when you're spinning out or going flying, it's because you didn't have a whole lot of blade on the ice in the first place. Yeah. But he said, as players, high school players mature, they can sense when I got to put my feet down because now I got to protect the puck. And they end up getting knocked the same amount, but they go down less because they're prepared for it. So he said, it's a process that a lot of young skilled players go through where they need to realize where on the ice I have to come off my toes. And that doesn't mean that they're not diving as much. It just means they're not as easy to knock down because they aren't on their toes as much. So he said, you have to be careful when you label a skill guy like him as a diver, because look at start. And as a skating coach, they're always looking at the skates. I don't, I would never have noticed that myself. I'm a he shoots, he scores guy. I'm not an expert on it, but he's saying to me, he said, look at plays when he gets knocked down. Where are his blades? How much of the blade is on the ice? Is he on it? If he's on his toes, it doesn't take much to knock anybody down if they're on their toes in those close quarter situations. So I think that could also be part of the maturation process. And in the future, when people say, well, he's not diving as much, well, he may not have been diving that much in the first place, but yeah, sometimes he went down easy because he's on his toes when he probably should have had more blade on the ice to be in protection mode. But that's just not how his mind works at that age.
Exactly. And, us internet scouts, we always forget that two things. These people are humans and mistakes happen. There's no one's perfect on the ice. And two, the guy barely is legal to drink in the United States of America. So let's let the guy just settle in and continue to develop. He is not at his peak, not even close. And what we've seen so far, like you said, there's a lot of ceiling to reach. This guy is going to be a hell of a player. And just something I want to talk about quickly with Josh Norris is, in that there was a season ticket holder event the other day, and it was said that Josh Norris should be ready to go. Will be ready to go for training camp, which is a great sign. That shoulder is something we're all going to be watching. Do you think he starts on the wing and Shane Pinto is the center on the second line, at least to start the year?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know. I haven't talked to Josh. He's in town with all the guys. He's skating. I have not been over to talk to him. And I think that's going to be a conversation that he has with the head coach and the training staff. And they're going to determine where he is in the recovery and training. And from what I understand, he's well through the rehab process and he's just regular, training for the season. But you can't deny the injury history on that shoulder. And there's no question that taking faceoffs against big, strong NHL players is a different kind of pressure on that shoulder. But, I remember having a conversation with Derek Brassard about this a couple of years ago while he was still playing. And he also had 3 shoulder surgeries. And he said, you know what? He said, for me, it really didn't change once I got through the surgeries and my rehab. If you're a center, you're a center, and you know how to adapt to whoever you're taking a face-off again. And every face-off isn't a physical battle. Sometimes it's about timing. Sometimes it's about. But he said, really the decision should be made based on where you play the best. And if you can't be as good a face-off guy because of the injury, then yeah, maybe make the move. But that's because of your performance, not because of the fear of another injury. He said, so I don't know if that's going to be a part of the process, but that was Brassard's feeling of it, being a center who also went through 3 shoulder surgeries. I'm not sure that's, you can't, every guy's injury is not the same as every other guy's injury, but at its core, and I have had this conversation with Josh before after 2 shoulder surgeries, and when we were talking about it wasn't an interview, we were just talking. And I was talking about the wing, and he said, yeah, I'll play wherever they put me. I'm going to try my best wherever they put me. But he looked at me and said, but I'm a center. So yeah. At that time anyway, he still thought of himself, I'm a center.
When was that?
He's going to play the wing if they want to play him there. And maybe they're concerned about they want him to play the wing. But unless something has changed, and it may have, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't talked to Josh. But after 2 shoulder injuries and surgeries, his thing to me was, Dean, I'm a center. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is still how he perceives himself. But he's going to play wherever they put him, and I don't pretend to know where that's going to be. They have some options now because with Cousins coming in, that gives them a legitimate veteran 4th line center, and Ridley Gregg can play some center for you as well. I'm not sure, still with his size and experience, that's the best fit. You like him to be all over the ice, but he's still pretty light. He's a fierce competitor, but he's still pretty light. And face-offs at the NHL level, still not a strong suit for him. But you've got options there, Yeah. Amadio is a right side guy who also can play some center for you. So they have lots of options, but not a lot of options that you'd like with your top 2 centers. In the real world, you'd like it to be Norris and Stützle, because part of the benefit of that is you've got Pinto, and Pinto, I believe, at his age, would still be in the top half of the league as far as third line centers for his age. Sure. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So that's what you'd like to have. And we've already seen that Pinto can be your second line center if you need him to be, but he's a hell of a third line center,
Exactly. 100%. And, one of the most important positions to have depth in is at center, which is why just a few days ago, I said the Sens, the middle 6 additions and the top 4 additions they brought in are great. But the reason if they miss the playoffs will be because of the lack of depth. And I'm not saying Nick Cousins moved the needle. What I'm saying with the Nick Cousins signing is it provides that flexibility where if somebody goes down, you don't have to redo the entire lineup, and you can keep that symmetry, which is so valuable, more so than just the player itself. It's just valuable for the entire team and the flexibility of the roster. In terms of Josh Norris, did he say that to you during last year?
After his second shoulder surgery,
Okay. So a bit ago.
actually before he had come back, we were having that conversation.
And it makes sense. I mean, you hear the same thing in baseball, for example. There's a lot of positional changes there. Same in the NFL. Sometimes you see a corner turn into a wide receiver, or vice versa. And you get it. This is the position the player's been playing for years and years, and that's what they've been known for. So I get it. But at the same time, like Josh said, you got to do what's best for the team and go wherever they tell you to go. And
yeah,
that's something to definitely keep an eye on during the preseason, especially in the preseason, because that should be an indicator. We'll see if they're testing him out, letting him kind of come back easy. We'll see what happens with that. Last thing on Tim Stützle, by the way, there was a lot of commotion, let's call it, on Twitter a couple days ago because he switched agents. And sometimes when players switch agents, it's for a trade, to facilitate a move out of the team. The guy just signed a massive contract extension with Ottawa. I have no doubt he's not going to be going anywhere. I don't think he's going to request a trade anytime soon. But for the Sens fans out there that are worried, what do you say to them?
It's not an abnormal thing. Players change agents all the time. There's players in the league who don't have agents. Drew Doughty dropped, after Newport did all the work getting him set up and doing all the negotiating for his last big contract in LA. He fired them right before he signed it, which I'm not sure how much the people in the agenting business like that kind of behavior, but Anthony Duclair has negotiated his last 2 contracts by himself. So that kind of stuff happens. I got to be honest with you. I don't read too much into it in that, there are some agents that like to negotiate in certain ways. And that's, it's interesting to tie a thread between all the players that have had trouble signing deals and the agent. And sometimes that's legitimate, but I don't think you can assume that's automatic just because, an agent and a player, decide to part ways. And so I got to be honest, I don't know why he did it. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, if anybody asked him whether he would tell them honestly, because quite honestly, it's his own business. It's his life. It's his agent. That's personal business. He's, you can ask him about the power play and expect an answer, but I don't think that a guy should tell you, what's going on with his wife, what's going on with his agent, that's personal in your own life stuff. But I don't look at that and say, well, that's going to lead to trouble somewhere along the line here. So I really don't put too much credence into it.
And I can't believe it was such a big deal. We're so close to the rookie tournament, just under a week away, basically. And we're talking about this like late July, early August tabloid nonsense. I mean, again, you said it yourself. It happens more often than you think. And there's millions of possible reasons why he did this, all of which, like you said, not our business. This is his life, his contract, his, professional resume, if you want to call it that. And that's not our business. Until you start hearing some rumors that he wants out, then maybe be worried. We have not heard a lick of that. And in fact, based off the things we just previously spoke about, especially with his development with Giroux, for example, I don't think he wants to go anywhere. So, and one more thing, somebody that wants to, request a trade and leave the city doesn't extend for, almost a decade. So at ease, Sens fans, everyone just settle down. Right.
And one of the other things is that there's a lot, and this isn't Tim Stützle, but there's lots of reason that, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I was talking to a player that changed agents, and I didn't know that he had changed agents. But I saw that because it was online. He was in that, and I forget which agency it was, but this BioSteel summer training program that is affiliated with a certain agency, and I forget which one. I don't know if I can't remember whether it's Newport or Octagon or I don't know which one. And anyway, he was in. I said, "Oh, I saw you in that video." He said, "Yeah." He said that's one of the reasons that I changed agencies. And I said, "Oh, I didn't even know." He said a bunch of my buddies were in that, and they said how good it was, and they enjoyed it, and it was really good for their summer development. So he said I switched agencies so I could be a part of that. So he wasn't particularly ticked off with his agency. It's just that was a thing a bunch of his buddies were in. He wanted to be a part of it, so he switched agencies to be a part of it. So, like, there are plenty of reasons why players over time agree to do things. I know a guy who switched agents within the same agency because he knew that in 2 years his current agent told him he was going to be retiring or greatly diminishing his client base. And so he said, I didn't mind being in the agency, but I didn't want my next contract's coming up in 3 years. So he said, I didn't want to be with a guy who was going to be retiring. So I just moved agents within the agency. So again, there's there's lots of reasons, and I have no clue why Tim changed his agents, but all the automatic assumptions that it's a bad thing may or may not be true. What I know is I have no idea why he changed agencies.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, I think people are just kind of bored. They want hockey news. They want to tweet about something. Hey, I don't I've been there. I understand it, but we have to be level-headed. And again, such a small move that many of us would make in our lives for different things in terms of whether you're changing a representative for yourself in, I don't know, real estate, for example. Just this is something that happens and it's not our business. So I just wanted to see what you have to say about that, get your opinion on that, because that was something that was going crazy on Twitter for the last couple of days until the Cousins signing. So glad to hear we're on the same page on that. One last question about the roster. Kind of touched on it with Tyler Clevin and whatnot, but Clevin, Angus Crookshank, Oscar Peterson, Stephen Holiday, Max Gwinnett. There's a lot of potential prospects that can make the team this year, or at least play at times with the team this year. Who is your dark horse prospect to make the roster, not including Clevin, because I think he's basically written in already. So other than Clevin, who do you really see emerging?
Well, Zach Ostapchuk will be an NHLer.
Yeah.
There's no question in my mind, whether it's this year, whether it's the start of this year. Hockey experts, guys who do this for a living, managers, scouts, they're the ones, coaches. They make those decisions and using their best judgment with their experience, whether a guy's ready to be an everyday NHLer. But there's no question in my mind that Zach Ostapchuk is going to be an NHLer. I think Angus Crookshank is a guy who has shown he can play NHL games for you. But I think for me, the dark horse that people may not know a lot about the name right now, and he joined Belleville late after coming out of Ohio State. Stephen Halliday is a guy who went into Ohio State, not a small program, and in his rookie year led that team in scoring. Yeah. Led the team in scoring the next year as well, and then got to the AHL level, improved playing against men, was no problem at all. This guy is big, he can put up numbers, and he can take the traffic. And I think that a lot of people don't look at him in the franchise progression chart and think much about him because they don't know much about him. But I think this is a guy that may end up surprising a lot of people how soon he will be ready to make a serious bid to be an NHL player. And so of the guys that are right on the doorstep, like I said, with Crookshank and Ostapchuk, I think that Halliday might be a guy that is right there on the doorstep as well. And on defense, when you look at the defense, they still have guys, two big losses for depth is what you already talked about in Lassie Thompson and Larson, a couple of veteran guys going back to play in Europe. Those are two guys, a lefty and a righty, who were veteran guys. But I think the fact that we never saw Lassie Thompson get called up and Larson rarely told you where the franchise looks at Matt and Paolo and Gannett, because those are the two right shot guys that did get called up. Yeah. But what it does point out is they have some guys that they really believe in on that left side, but they're not ready yet. I look at, Donovan's going to start playing in the AHL regular this year coming out of junior, and Thomas Hammer is going to be in that same boat, and Philip Ruse. Yeah, right. Absolutely. So, where they're lacking in depth in the organization now turns out to be left side defense, because they have that little gap of guys that are right on the fringe of being NHL players, and that's where it's going to be. And I've heard people talking about, well, they're going to sign a veteran guy to come in on a PTO. Yeah, maybe that's a possibility, but you also have to remember that right now where this team is, each NHL team is allowed to carry 50 contracts in your AHL players, your NHL players, and junior players that you've signed a contract. So you're allowed 50 contracts. Ottawa has 49 right now. Yeah. They only have room to sign one more contract. And the cap space they have right now is only 1.1 million. They don't have any room to sign anybody who's much over top of the league minimum. So if they bring in a veteran guy on a PTO, that's fine. But if they end up wanting to keep him, they're basically at the max cap and max contract. So there's not a ton of flexibility here, So I'm just warning people, if you think there's going to be a couple more guys signed before the season starts, there isn't, unless there's going to be a couple of guys moving out. So just be prepared for that.
100%. And I've been saying that all summer. I mean, Travis Hamonic, from what I've heard, is a great guy off the ice, a mentor. But some people think that they can do better as a sixth, seventh defenseman than Hamnick. But the fact that he's still on this team, he's not going anywhere. They're clearly set on him being at least a seventh defenseman, rolling out a very young pairing there with Clevin and JBD projected anyways to be the third pairing. And
Yep.
we'll see what happens. Again, look, if that is just an absolute disaster, maybe Manapolo gets a chance. He was actually very good for Belleville, and I'm glad he brought his name up. He was very underrated for them. Came over from Europe from Pure Dorion before, of course, Steos, and it's great to see that Steos kept him
Same
on.
as Gannett. Same
Yeah,
as Gannett,
exactly.
though. When he's come up and played minutes, he's played solid minutes, and he's not a guy who's going to put a ton
Late
of
bloomer
pucks in the
too.
net at the NHL level, but he's been solid. So,
Yeah.
in today's NHL, and you and I have had this discussion many times before, in today's NHL, defense is the most injured position. The way the game is played now, defensemen have a hard time being able to protect themselves. The league wants offense, and it's oftentimes at the expense of the safety of defensemen. So defensemen get injured, in my opinion. Defensemen get injured more than any other position.
Yeah.
And we've seen time and again with this team and every other team in the league. You have to have in your organization 10 defensemen who can play at the NHL level. Obviously, teams are not going to carry 10 players on their roster, but that means you have to have, 3 or 4 guys in the minors who can come up and play minutes for you at any given time. And for Ottawa, they have that on the right side, but they don't have a lot of depth on the left side. So that is an area where you're hoping that some guys progress pretty quickly on that left side in Belleville.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of AHL guys that brought in. I think you were mentioning Ruse, for example. Jeremy
Yep.
Davies is another one. So they have some guys, but it's not like the caliber of a Thompson, nor especially a Jacob Larson. So you are right, but it's kind of that curve where you're gonna have to go when you have all these young prospects like Donovan, Amara, and Adanovsky. And yeah, once again, hopefully you don't have to get down to the 9th and 10th ranked defenseman. That's how you know you're in a real deep spot if we get to that point anyways. And I'm pretty comfortable with Gannett and Manapolo being those first call-ups.
Now, I would bring up a name that you just mentioned too, and he is not going to start the season in Ottawa. But as far as roles go, and we all know that, when you make a call-up, you're calling up, if you're calling up a forward, I'm always entertained when people say, well, how can they not call up this guy? He's a third on the team and scoring in Belleville. Well, if you lost a third line winger, you're not bringing up you're replacing the role, somebody who plays that role. Andonovsky is a very interesting name to bring up because he's just getting into the organization as far as playing at the AHL level. But as far as role goes, he's a very physical stay-at-home defenseman. So on that left side, third pairing defenseman, that's what the organization wants that role to be. So I'm saying down the road, Andonovsky is a guy, if he progresses, that will be a guy that is in more conversations if they have to bring a player up and you're looking at replacing a role, because his style of game is the style of game they want that third pairing left side defenseman to be. So down the road, if his game elevates to the point, it might be one of those conversations. Well, they need to call up a third line left winger. Why didn't they get this guy? He's got this many power play. That's not the role they'll be replacing. If Clevin's not that guy, or he gets injured, knock on wood and hope it doesn't happen. But Andonovsky's style of play is the kind of play that they want to replace that with. So it's all a matter of him being able to progress to be able to play that style effectively at the NHL level. And I don't by any means say that he's at that level right now, but down the road, that's what they're looking for that position and its replacements to be.
Yeah, give him a few years and see what happens. But
Yeah.
there's a reason why he's like the most talked about player on the Kitchener Rangers. And there's some solid players on that team last year in the last couple of years, some NHL draft picks. So there's a reason for that. He is such a standout player. And, in a league like the OHL, as you know, that's not exactly known for the defensive prowess. His defensive abilities are very, very encouraging. And that's why he got that, entry-level contract this year. That's why.
Well, speaking about Kitchener, you don't have to go
Yep.
that far to have the conversation about Arbor Jacki. He's working at Costco and then he's in the NHL because, for Montreal, he came up with a certain style of play that Montreal didn't have very much of. And
that was crazy. Sorry about that, Dean. Don't know what happened.
Shit happens, eh?
Yeah, that's what happens. I just watched back the clip. It looked like maybe a quick power surge or something because my light went right back on. So,
Yeah.
yeah, a little technical difficulties for y'all. Sorry about that. But we are back. And the last thing you were talking about with me was, of course, dark horses to make the roster. And you were talking about, Jack Guy from the Canadians, about how he was working at Costco and now he's in the National Hockey League, and how he brings a presence that, that team needed. I'll just let you finish your thought, though.
Yeah, just I was just saying that, I don't think to start the season, or any time in the immediate future, but I think, that's the kind of player in the organization that people should look at down the road. Andonovski, because Andonovski plays the kind of role that this organization has determined they need to develop players at for the NHL level. And so, they want to have a more physical back end on this team, and especially in that third pairing. So, if you're looking at players coming up through the system and what they're trying to develop, some are going to have different kinds of skill sets, and he has one of the skill sets that this team and organization wants to develop. So just put them on your list of people that you want to keep track of in the next year or two and see where they're at.
Last thing I'll ask about before the big question, which I'll reveal in a
There's a big question.
The huge question,
Huge.
Dean. It's a massive one. One thing I wanted to ask, though, because we haven't really spoken about it other than at the NHL level with Forsberg and Allmark, is the goaltending in Belleville. I mean, there's going to be a huge battle there. I mentioned briefly that Mandolese is gone. Good luck to him. I think he signed with another team. I think the Islanders, if I'm not mistaken, but he should be a guy that could potentially compete for a backup spot maybe somewhere one day. Best of luck to him. But for of course, Levi Merulainen and Matt Sogard, that's gonna be a hell of a battle. Two guys who equally have a chance to be NHL guys in the near future. What do you think about that battle going into the season?
Well, I think a lot of what that battle will be about is going to be about health. Because at at the NHL level as well, the last couple of years, Ottawa has had unbelievably bad luck as far as goaltender health. They've gone through so many goaltenders at all three levels. Like they had, last year when they had Sinclair coming back and forth, coming from the East Coast League. Back up again, and now it's going to be Michael Simpson, who's the guy who's kind of their designated fifth goaltender in the organization. But they were going back and forth and having to sign guys on 2-week contracts just to have a goalie in the East Coast League. So I think health is going to be a big part of it. But you look at the way things are set up here, it's really set up for next year for there to be a battle between Sogard and Forsberg for the backup job in Ottawa. That's kind of the way it was set up with Korpisalo, that, Anton Forsberg's contract is up at the end of this year. And I think the hope and the expectation was that Matt Sogard would be in a position after another year this year of going back and forth between the two when injuries are required, and having half a season in the AHL, half a season in the NHL, and then being a guy that walks into the backup position next year. But things can change, like it's goaltending and it's hockey. And so there can be injuries and different things. But, you kind of look at the way the contracts are, and when a guy's coming off a two-way into a one-way, and, this other guy, this veteran guy who's now getting up into his, not in the late 20s anymore. And now he's moving up in age when his contract ends. So, that's kind of a scenario where it's easy to see what the thought pattern might be. But you know what? Things can change. If Forsberg has a big year, maybe they think about re-signing him. And, if Ullmark extends, maybe that pair works really well and you don't want to mess with it. Like a whole bunch of things can happen. But there's no question that the biggest single thing for Ottawa in their goaltending at all three levels, the NHL level, AHL, and the East Coast League level, is going to be health. They have to get some consistency out of all those players, and that requires the players to play on a consistent basis.
Well, that's why I feel bad for Simpson, is because we don't have an ECHL affiliate anymore. We would have to have him either ride the bench and hopefully discontinue the ride the bench because we don't want to see Sogard or Merulainen go down, or, as you know, we'll have to go to a transfer and play for another team. Actually, I think it was Jordan Binnington. He played for the Boston Bruins affiliate the year that he won or made that run with the St. Louis Blues. So stuff like that does happen.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a weird kind of situation to be in. But yeah, between those two, those are two high draft picks for a reason. And as you know, you've been in this league longer than me. So especially that goalies are weird. They're weird people in a fun way, I mean, but they're weird. Their rituals are different, and the position, of course, just completely different from the rest of the sports. So you really just never know. And the thing I always say is, as you know, Craig Anderson, late bloomer. Most goaltenders are late bloomers. They peak out in their career far later than a forward or a defenseman. Why is that the case? I don't know. I'm not even going to try to attempt to explain that to you, but that is the case. So to see these two goaltenders already arguably being able to play some NHL minutes is encouraging. But again, I don't think we have to make a decision on these two right away, like a lot of people are saying. Again, ideally, one of the two comes up as the backup with Allmark after this year, but you never know. Forsberg, like you said, can go off. That tandem might be just very, very good together, and they might just not be ready. And again, I don't think, and this is why I'm saying all this, I don't think people should be very concerned if both of them are not ready to make the jump next year because they're young goaltenders, and sometimes it takes a bit longer than others. So we'll have to see with that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, goaltending in this way is the same as every other position. There's not many places where you can say goaltending is the same as in hockey because it is very different, and so are the players who play the position. But the one constant that is the same in goaltending as it is for any other position, if you want a job in the NHL, ultimately you have to take someone else's.
Yeah.
You know, there's no jobs where, well, that team's had only one goalie for the last two. No, every job in the NHL is a job. So if Matt Sogard is going to be an NHL goaltender, it means somebody else is not. And at the end of the day, every player has to win a job from somebody else. That's just the law of the jungle. So all the other things aside, and plans and contracts and everything else, at the end of the day, a goaltender, like any other player, has to take someone else's job to have a job. So whether it's Merolainen or Sogard, whatever the plans are, you still have to play well enough to have a job in the NHL. And that's the bottom line.
Absolutely. Now, I mentioned the big question. You ready for that big question,
Is
Dean?
it now the time for the big question?
Yeah, you're gonna get in the batter's box. Wrong sport, but get ready to take a
Hey,
big.
do I need to stretch or anything to be ready?
Hey, if you want, I might have to stretch too before I get into that one.
Okay, give it to me. What's the big question?
Here it is. Are the Ottawa Senators this year a playoff team, Dean? Yes or no?
Oh, wow. I'm not sure that's a yes or no question because this year going into the season, the owner is new. Because you remember last year, Andlar wasn't named the owner, I think, until what, September 22nd.
It was literally just before the season, yeah.
Yeah, the general manager is new, the coach is new, you got a whole bunch of new players, and most importantly, you got a new starting goalie. There's so much new, it's hard to say. So having an absolute yes or no answer is very difficult to have. I will say yes because I'm an optimistic person, because you've posed me with a yes or no question, so I'm going to say yes. But as we all know, anybody knows, there's a whole bunch of things that this relies on. It relies on not having any major injuries to major players. It relies on the new players fitting in. It relies on this team as a team being better defensively. And most of all, it relies on this team getting saves that oftentimes last year they didn't get. But I'm going to be optimistic because I like being a glass half full guy. And you've given me only two choices, so I'm taking the yes.
Journalism 101. If you want a specific answer, make sure they give you the specific answer. Don't leave any leeway. And I hope you're right. I like the way you think. Again, it's still the summer. Let's enjoy the good vibes. Keep the good vibes going into the regular season.
Let's also remember, I think I've explained this to you before, both Gord and I, we work for the radio station. We don't work for the team, and we're contract guys.
Yeah.
We get, if the Ottawa Senators play more games, we get paid by the game. If they play more games, we both make more money. So remember, as it relates to Dean and Gord, there's no I in team, but there's two in invoice. So let's get some playoff games so Dean and Gord can make more money. That's the key we should all remember every time we're having this discussion.
That is, you know what? I'm just going to throw myself out there too. More games, more views, more money. Sens, Dean and I are talking. Can you listen to us finally? We've been waiting. It's been a while. So that's Two Eyes and Invoice is a good one. I might have to steal that from you, by the way.
Take it. It's all yours.
Now a bit off the ice. Sorry, that was a good one. A bit off the ice. You know, the Sens made some huge additions. We kind of spoke about it with the coaching staff and whatnot. And, you know, I don't really want to get into the scouting and stuff because, you know, with that, you know, at the end of the day, I don't know enough about the scouts in general to make a strong opinion on whether or not we should have fired this and whatever. That's something I don't want to really get involved in. I don't know enough, and I don't feel comfortable to talk about that. But I do know a bit about communications. I work right now as a comms coordinator. I've been in the world of communications for a while, and of course, as somebody that does content creation, you're in that world. So the hires of Sylvain Saint Laurent and Ian Mendez, respectively, as the communications, the top communications guy and VP of comms, I think are great additions. It'll be huge for community outreach, particularly with francophones in Gatineau, and as well here in Ottawa, as well in Orleans, and just in general for the general population. I think these are two great hires, two hires that have been journalists covering this team in the past, know this market well, know the fan base well. I think they're slam dunk home runs. What about you? Especially since you know them even better than me. You worked with them for a while.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the key things is you're hiring two guys that understand what the job is. You know, they have both worked in broadcasting and in the journalistic side of the business. They know what they expected from media relations departments when they were still on the other side of the fence. So they know the job, and they know the team. You know, both of them cover this team for long periods of time. They know the history, they know the present, they know the past, and they want to set some future. I think it's a huge thing to have Sylvain Saint Laurent on the docket because, as you mentioned, you know, having somebody who's French first in the department. They've had people in the past who could speak French, but they were oftentimes English guys or girls speaking French as best they could, and that was fine. But having a true francophone, who the francophone hockey population knows, because Sylvain has been so involved in the media on the Quebec side, both writing and with his work on RDS, you know, that he knows how to connect the dots because he's been talking to those dots for his whole career. And the other side to me that's a bit disappointing is the fact that you know, our industry is an ever shrinking industry, and Sylvain was already out of the industry as Le Droit, the newspaper he worked for, was already shrinking its sports department, and he was already out of that. But with Ian leaving the Athletic, I don't know, but I haven't heard any plans that the Athletic's going to replace him. So and I don't know what the future is there. There's a very real possibility that they won't. So that's one more journalistic voice out of the marketplace, and I don't like that. But you know, that's the way it is these days. But you know, you're talking about two experienced guys who know the industry from both sides, and that connection directly to the francophone marketplace could down the road be very, very important for this team in developing what has been forever an underdeveloped part of the marketplace for the Ottawa Senators.
Absolutely. And I've always found it crazy. It never makes sense to me that they've never really went in on that community, considering the fact that two things. One, they're a pretty large community in Ottawa, and two, you're right next to Quebec. So it doesn't really make much sense to me, but I'm glad to see anyways that is changing. And, you know, the more Sens fans we can bring into this community, the better, of course. For us, obviously, just as fans and content creators, but as a business as well. So it just makes sense. And I really never understood why they never did it. But again, new philosophy. I think, frankly, a smarter philosophy is taking place here in the organization, and it's showing in all aspects.
And, you know, one other thing, and I don't know because I don't know what the parameters are of their job description. And at some point when I see Ian and Sly, I'll actually ask them. But, you know, there's a chance that fans will still get to enjoy their writing because both of them are writers.
Oh, of course,
and
like on the
just
team.
because in the past, media relations department people don't really write anything other than press releases, that doesn't mean that they can't write for the website, for the station, or for the team's website, or you know, write some long form stuff that is part of it. So, you know, because you've got two professional writers now headlining your media relations staff, just because it's not really something that has been done before doesn't mean it couldn't be done again. And maybe Sly and Ian will continue to write as part of their new responsibilities, except now it'll be for the team on the website rather than for independent journalistic newspaper or online publishing. So, and I don't know because I haven't talked to either of them if that's going to be part of what they do, but they may go from being writers to competing with writers covering the Ottawa Senators. I don't know exactly what the parameters are of their job description, but both of them have been career writers, so maybe that will continue in some form.
I think a massive aspect of their job is going to be that community outreach, not only with just non-fans, but with the fans, the diehard fans, the content creators, making it feel more inclusive and connected between the organization and the fan base would be huge. This video is going to be out on Sunday, but on Wednesday, Ian actually just texted me and invited me to this launch event on Wednesday. Maybe you'll be there. I don't know, Dean.
I will be there.
Then we'll see each other there. We'll see each other there, which will be great. But that kind of thing, these are the type of little things that go a long way to not only bring back those fans, but for myself, I'm going to be making a video about it that makes fans feel more connected as well, and gives people like myself who are not credentialed media for the Sens, for example, a bit of an inside look, which is also really cool. So that's appreciated on my part, and I'm sure the people that are going to watch that video, my followers and whatnot, are going to appreciate that too. Again, it's the little things like that that go such a long way, and I cannot, understate that enough. Now, maybe this should have been the big question, frankly, but
Two big questions. Two big
a
questions.
bit of a curveball.
Okay.
Maybe I'll be
All
like R.A. Dickey, throw a knuckleball at you. But this is something we've been talking about for, frankly, a decade. It doesn't feel like this story is going anywhere. It's, of course, LeBreton Flats and the potential new arena for the Ottawa Senators. We found out in that season ticket availability or event the other day that the Sens and the NCC is at times, let's just say things are not done fast with them. So it's not shocking it's taken this long, but this development is very concerning to say the least. I don't know if it's, negotiation through the media or trying to force the NCC's hand to give more public funding. I don't know what it is, but they said, the Sens organization said, Cyril Leader said that they're not close on an arena deal, and September 20th, they're going to have a new announcement that's near the deadline for this memorandum. So what do you think about that, and how do you see that going?
I have no inside information. I have no idea what's going on in negotiations. And I don't know, maybe they are using the media to put some pressure on the NCC. That's just business. That's just
exactly.
Using whatever pressure points you can. I don't believe the Senators are looking for any money from the NCC. From what I understand, it's being given the ability to lease more land there, because the project, for it to work, has to be bigger, has to be more than just an arena on a small little piece of land. So
parking, especially, that's a huge one.
But for me, from the outside looking in, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, it just strikes me that the Ottawa Senators, Mr. Andlauer, has several options. The NCC really doesn't. They can put something else in that space, but I can't think of anything that will drive people, drive traffic, drive usage in that area the way a multi-use facility like an NHL rink would bring, whether it be hockey, concerts, conventions, all those things. There's nothing you could put in there that would drive the kind of traffic that having a multi-use NHL level facility and all the accompaniments with that would go in there. So for that reason, I think the NCC needs this more than the Senators do. I think Mr. Andlauer could find lots of places and lots of willing partners, including the city of Ottawa, to build a new building. Yeah, for sure. So, the NCC is going to do what they can do, but I think that really they're the ones who really need to make a deal with the Senators. They need this facility down there to make all the other parts that they intend to use that land for, to make them all work, to drive traffic to that area, to make those other parts that aren't going to be rink or rink adjacent, to make them successful. You want to get all these big conventions, and you can't get them because right now the biggest building, which is Canadian Tire Center, is nowhere near enough hotel space to be able to draw them. Well, you want to draw them, you're not drawing them unless you have a rink and it's on your land. So like there's so many other things that come attached to that. I really believe that the ball is certainly in the NCC's court, but they need this deal more than the Senators do. So we'll see what happens. I don't think that for the Senators, this is what they want. This is what I think Michael Andlauer and Cyril Leader want, and they've spent plenty of time on it. But if it doesn't happen, they have other options. As a taxpayer in Ottawa, I'm scared to think of what's going to go in that spot that's going to be useful and usable to the population of Ottawa if it's not a multi-use NHL rink. Do we need the 11th museum downtown? Do we like? I don't even know what they would use that land for. They would use it for something, but how many people are going to go? Yeah, you know what I mean.
Something
So
like that would be cool, I guess, but it
yeah,
wouldn't draw the
at the
same.
end of
You're
the,
absolutely right.
yeah, at the end of the line, my opinion would be, in my opinion, without any knowledge of inside workings, it just appears to me that the NCC needs this deal more than the Senators do. So we'll see what happens.
And I agree. I mean, I'm not going to get political, but I'm a guy that loves politics, and I've been watching this, and it's pretty obvious that Sutcliffe is not being this outspoken for no reason. He can see the writing on the wall that, like you said, the NCC kind of needs to make this happen, because otherwise you have all these shopping space and buildings. It's just another neighborhood. It's not going to really attract that boom that you really want there. That's one thing. Two, the city's already publicly declared, well, Mayor Sutcliffe has said anyways, that not only is he willing to help fund the project, but he has many ideas of where the project should go. And three, in that, season ticket availability the other day, it was said that they're putting improvements and upgrades into the arena, upgrading seats, upgrading, the halls, knocking down walls to make it larger. They're investing into the arena. So obviously the Ottawa Senators are very comfortable staying there for a few more years if necessary. Now, is that ideal? No. But they own the land, they have property there, they have parking space, and they own that arena. They can make some minor adjustments in the meantime until they find something, legit and concrete. Again, I'm not going to get political. It's not shocking the NCC has dragged this out. Obviously, it's not entirely all on them, but at the same time, they may have overplayed their hand. So we'll see what happens with that. There's a lot in play, public funding, space, you name it. There's a lot in play, and I'm really intrigued to see what they say in about 3 weeks here, maybe 4, give or take, on September 20th or so. I'm really interested to see what they decide and what they say, because if they don't do it, I'm especially interested to see what those reasons are and what they're planning on doing. And if they do decide to go there, I'm really interested to see, one, public funding, and two, that parking space issue. We all know the LRT is not exactly all reliable in Ottawa, so I think that's a big sticking point as well. So we'll keep an eye on that. Sorry for that curveball, that knuckleball.
Oh, no problem, no problem.
Had to ask.
Yeah, but I agree with you. Mark Sutcliffe is the mayor. His job is to create growth and a prosperous environment for the city of Ottawa. That's his job. So in this discussion, Ottawa's talking about, with the NCC, the Senators talking about 7 acres, and they want more. They want, they need to have between 13 and 15. Well, what's Sutcliffe saying? I'll find 13 to 15 acres for you. Like, I'm right here. You want 13 to 15 acres? I'm right here. Let's have a conversation. And as far as the funding, there's always debate about that. But the reality is, and I've heard the debates a million times, but the reality is that forget about this being the hockey business. Forget about this being the NHL. Any building, any construction, any development that is at the middle of it is jobs related, is going to have 3 levels of funding. It's like anything, like the plant that they just had a press conference about a month ago to make batteries for electric cars. The municipality put in money, the province put in money, and the federal government put in money because it's 1,000 jobs. Well, the hockey team, the building, that's 1,000 jobs. That's how many people it takes. It's 1,000 jobs. So as a downtown development of over $1 billion, even after construction jobs are gone, the running of the building is 1,000 jobs. That means whether you like it or not, there's going to be requested 3 levels of funding, and granted will be 3 levels of funding, because it always is for any project that develops a system where you're going to produce 1,000 jobs. That's just reality.
We also have to remember 2 things. Firstly, there are payment structures where if there's public funding, certain revenue is given back, or vice versa. That does happen. So it's not just, here's a blank check, go at it. There's a very sophisticated deal that goes into these type of things. So it's not just, here's money from the taxpayers, go crazy. But also, yeah, absolutely, there's jobs created in the short and long term. You're creating a new neighborhood. That is a huge economic boom for a city like Ottawa downtown that desperately needs it. And I'm not going to make a hard stance on pro or against, because I don't know how much money they're asking for and whatnot. But what I will say is, again, especially when you're dealing with the NCC, it's a federal agency, right? So of course there's going to be public funding involved in this. That's not even up for conversation. The real debate is how much, and how much is it given in terms of a blank check. So again, that and the space, like you mentioned, those are the 2, in my opinion, this is just me talking. I haven't really asked around and I haven't heard anything. But those are the two things to me that probably are the sticking points. And I'm sure there's others, but off the top of my head, those are the two that make sense. And those are the two that have been a huge issue for this last decade. So it's not exactly like that would be a shock to any of you watching this right now. Let's have some fun these next couple of questions, though. Enough politics and NCC and the mayor. Let's have some fun. Let's talk about the Sens Ring of Honor. Who do you think should be the next Ottawa Senator to go to the Ring of Honor, and also the next Ottawa Senator to be, inducted to the, to the rafters? Join these fellas back here with their number retired. And I say this because probably the most popular player right now that can go in either category is Craig Anderson. I think he's the best goaltender in franchise history. I think this guy in the 2010s was a top 10 goaltender. This guy, if you look at the stats, he was ranked number 2 in a lot of American goaltending all-time stats for goals against average, save percentage, wins, shutouts. This guy is slept on, was not talked about nearly enough during the 2012 to 2015, or 2012 to 2017, I should say. I mean, 2014, 2013, he was incredible. Faced the most shots in the National Hockey League. He had like a 930, 940 save percentage. But he never won a cup. He never really did anything like that with Ottawa. So that's why people are debating Ring of Honor or to the rafters. What do you think?
I think this is going to be a really short conversation because I can't comment on any of it. I'm on the selection committee, and we're not allowed to publicly discuss our thoughts, our feelings, how we might vote, who we should nominate, who we shouldn't nominate. So it's like at the Hall of Fame, any of the selectors are not allowed to talk in public about any of the goings on. So this will be really short because the only perspective is going to be yours because I'm not allowed to talk about any of it.
Absolutely. And sorry about that. I didn't even know that.
No, that's not everybody knows I'm on the committee. So
just a quick question. If you can't answer, you have to plead the fifth. Hey, I'm here. I understand. But is there going to be future announcements in terms of Ring of Honor or, numbers retired in the future? What do you?
Well, there's always names being forwarded by people, and we usually have a couple of meetings a year. But we have not had, I can tell you that we have not had, a meeting has not been called for this year to consider names. That doesn't mean it won't be, but we have not had a meeting to look at who's being considered. And then one member of the executive board is required to make the case. After someone is proposed as a possible member, then one member of there's a voting board, but there's an executive board that's a smaller board. One member of the executive board is required to basically make the case for that player and why they should be considered. And then there's votes that are taken after that. We have not gotten to the point this season where whatever names have been proposed and put in and put up for nomination have been presented to us. And then we have not gotten to the point where it's decided which member of the executive board will basically make the case for that individual, whether it be like Doc Chow last year as a doctor going in, or as a builder, or a player in Ring of Honor, so we haven't gotten to that point. But there's meetings every year, and like through COVID, stuff had to be pushed on because you can't have a ceremony if no one's allowed in the building. But those meetings will be coming up. I'll get an email telling me that in 3 weeks we're having a meeting, but haven't gotten that yet. But they do go on every year. That doesn't guarantee that anyone's going to be elected to either the Ring of Honor or having a retirement. But there will be meetings and there will be suggestions of who should be nominated. But that hasn't happened yet. And that's how the process goes. But I'm not allowed to tell you who is up. And right now, I don't know who's going to be nominated this year because no one's sent me a list of who's proposed. But that process has not yet started. So I can't give you an answer on that because I don't have one. But even if there was an answer, I could tell you that I could tell you that it's going on, but I couldn't tell you who or for what.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that transparency and kind of answer part of my question in terms of the voting process. I'm curious, is it, does it have to be unanimous or can it be just majority? How does that work, the voting itself and the, application process for people to apply or, submit an application for a potential nominee? How do those two things work?
Anybody can make an application and make a presentation by just calling the Ottawa Senators office and say, I'd like to put in a player's name to be considered for Ring or whatever, and that will be passed on to, I can't pretend to tell you who that's going to be passed on to, but that would get passed on. Anyone can nominate, number one. Number two, The voting is more than a simple majority, but it doesn't have to be unanimous. And I'm not allowed to tell you what the percentage is, but it doesn't have to be unanimous. But there is a minimum standard, which is more than 50%.
Really putting the Senate and senators, my goodness, it's just like the American Senate. That's funny. All right, well, hey, really cool, and we'll have to keep an eye on that. I will get you off of the testimony here, Dean. We'll move on to the final question. This is a bit
Is
of
this big question number 3 or just final question?
final question. I'm not
Final
going to throw
question,
another one at
but
you.
not a big one.
It's a big one, actually.
Okay, so
but I
3
don't
big
wanna,
questions.
But I want to make you feel comfortable. You know, you're in the groove. You're in that
I'm
batter's
always
box.
comfortable.
The last question is friend of the show, John Abbott, just signed with Calgary. He's going to be working for Sportsnet. Congratulations, by the way, to John, if you're watching this. Just an absolute, you've met him many times, of course. Just a great individual. Always love talking to him, texting him, whatever. He's just a really, really great guy. And Calgary got a great person in John. So the best of luck to John. Obviously, we'll stay in touch, but best of luck to him in a well-deserved promotion there in Calgary as the full-time guy. But of course, and I know you're on a contract, but I have to ask, you used to be the voice of the Sens, not only on radio, but of course on the TV with Sportsnet. You've done a few games here and there with TSN. I remember, I think it was Detroit, like in 2015, you did a game, and that was incredible to watch. But is there any chance that you and Gord shift over to TSN one day in the TV realm of things?
I don't know. That has not been brought up, but my contract is with TSN, and they can put me wherever they want me. If they want me to do some TV games, I would do some TV games. If they want me to keep doing all radio, when I left TV in the first place, what is it, 10 years ago now, the contract I signed with them was, you get to choose what I do. And I've done some TV, did the Spengler Cup, filled in for Gord Miller when he's been sick a couple of times. Doesn't matter to me, to be honest with you. Love what I do and where I do it. I don't need that professionally to go somewhere. I've been there, done that, enjoyed that, but I love doing what I'm doing now. If they want me to go back and do some TV, sure, put me where you want me. But I would think that if they had some ideas about me going back and doing some TV this close to the season, somebody would have phoned me and said that that's a possibility. But so I've never been contacted, but I would think.
What are you doing, TSN? Call this guy. What are we doing?
Well, no, but I would think, and I don't know, but I would think, you know, for that set, Gord is the number one guy on TV. And even though we're in the same company, I don't know, because I'm not a part of those TV discussions, but I would think that you might want to start developing the next generation, as Johnny Abbott was and is. Yeah. And so rather than putting old Dean back on the air on TV, I think it might be better time spent developing the next generation. And TSN already in their stable has some very, very good young broadcasters. And a personal favorite of mine, I think she's going to be a star, is Kenzie Lalonde. I think that Kenzie is an outstanding young broadcaster, and I would love to see her. I have no say, I have no vote, but I would love to see Kenzie and a couple of other young up-and-coming broadcasters within our company get a chance to, in her case, do some NHL. She's never done NHL games, to start doing some NHL games, or in a couple of other cases, do some more NHL games and see if they can blossom into the level of broadcaster that you would use as Gord's second on a more regular basis. So I don't know. No one's ever contacted me. If they want me to go back and do some TV again, I'll sit in whatever chair they want me to. But if it was me calling the shots, I think I'd want to start developing the next generation, and the top of my list would be Kenzie Lalonde. I think she's uber talented, and she's only going to go up. I think she's on a great path right now. I'll say that. I think she's very talented.
Yeah, Claire Hanna is another person I want to put into that ring in terms of like young talent. I mean, she did commentary this year at the Olympics for volleyball, and I don't know if they would want to pull her from, being the reporter, but I think she has a hell of a future as well. And I'll throw my hat in there. I'm available TSN if you want somebody. I can help out with that as well. But those are some very good names. And again, hey, those names I'd be happy with, and especially if you came back as well for some games, I think that'd just be a blast of nostalgia that I would absolutely love. So we'll see what happens with that. But Dean, this has been over an hour. Always a pleasure talking to you. This is so much fun. The time literally flew by. I only noticed it was going for so long when the power went out, which was a Sens Talk first. So congratulations, Dean. You're a part of Sens Talk history. But Dean, we'll talk on Wednesday, of course, when we see each other. But where can the fans follow you for the regular season?
I'm on not on Twitter as much as I used to be, but on Twitter. What is my Twitter handle? I think it's
PXP Ottawa.
PXP Ottawa, yeah. And for not all, because like our station TSN 1200, our station Twitter, all of us contribute to that. So there's no one person who does TSN Twitter, but most of the stuff from the rink is me. I like Gord does almost all the interviews, and I do almost all of the Twitter stuff. So from practices and morning skates and stuff like that, not all of it, but most of it, that's me. But again, like when people say, you know, like whoever's doing the admin, well, that could be virtually any of us. There's no one person that does it. Kind of like wherever we are, whoever's at that thing will put stuff on the TSN 1200 thing. So I do more of that than I actually do of my own. But yeah, that's where and I'm on Instagram, but I never post anything on Instagram. I'm just I'm on the air, TSN 1200. Listen to me on the radio. Listen to Gordon and I and our whole team and Graham Creech and everybody on the radio, and enjoy the games.
Absolutely. And once again, always a pleasure to have a literal Sens legend, a Sens legend. I have a feeling one day you're going to get kicked out of a meeting, and maybe you'll see yourself on one of those pillars as well, because you're certainly one of those key figures to the franchise and its 30 plus years of existence. So Dean, thank you so very much for joining
I think
the show.
I'd vote against that. I'm on the committee. I think I'd vote against that. You have to
Why?
have done some.
You
have to have done something other than just hang around for a long time.
Oh, that's funny. All right. Well, hey, I'll make sure they vote for you, Dean. And again, it's always a pleasure. We'll talk soon for sure.
Anytime.